Stay tuned for another episode of the Coming Soon podcast with Spider.
Hello, everybody. Spider here once again. Coming Soon podcast coming to you from San Antonio, Texas. And my guest is not in Texas. You're actually out there in New Zealand. Paul Lewis, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, thank you. Yeah, Auckland, New Zealand.
Man, and of course, we were talking geography, and I think we both got lost in the conversation because, it turns out we're not really savvy as far as where we live, right?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say. Yeah.
No, you see, and that's what I was saying earlier. I'm born and raised here in Texas. I've lived in Florida. I lived in Atlanta, Georgia, for like almost a year. But I always came home. So here I know I won't get lost. Everywhere else, man, somebody better come looking for me.
Yeah, I've lived most of my life in Auckland, but yeah, in some ways, I sort of don't. I used to not see myself as an Aucklander because I wasn't born in Auckland. Moved here when I was about 7 years old. I lived in London for 7 years, and I've kind of been all over the place as well. So, but yeah, most of my life has been spent in Auckland.
Man, and how did you end up there? Mind me asking?
In London?
Yes.
Yeah. My now ex-wife and I decided when we were 30, because I started my career as an actor and a singer. And so, my professional performing career started out in opera and musical theater. So, at the, when was it? It was April 2000. We decided we would relocate to London because my wife had, what do you call it, ancestry. So we were both able to go and live and work in London.
Okay.
So we thought we'd try out for the West End and so forth, and it was a slog. it was pretty hard, but it was also a really good time.
No, and of course, from London, did you guys go directly to New Zealand, or did you guys travel?
Oh, you mean whilst we were in London?
Right.
Yeah, we did a little bit of travel, but we were jobbing actors, so we didn't have a huge amount of money. So we traveled when we could. But, at one point I was doing like three different jobs. And so life would be about covering the very expensive rent to live in London. And, it's not a cheap place to live. So we didn't have a lot of spare money to sort of like go on holiday. But every now and again we went into Europe. Yeah.
Nice, bro. And of course, you said you used to do theater, you used to do acting. So where does being a puppeteer come from? When did that start?
Yeah. So when I was a child, I actually really wanted to be a professional cartoonist. So I loved Charlie Brown. Snoopy was like my guy. Yeah, absolutely adored those cartoons. And I loved Marvel Comics and DC Comics, and there's a cartoon here in New Zealand that, and also in Australia, very popular and famous, called Foot Rot Flats. And it was basically about a farmer and his dog. His dog is called Dog, and the farmer was called Wall. And it was just basically about their life living on a farm. And created by a cartoonist named Murray Ball, who was just, for me, he was the bar that was set for writing and artwork. He was just so funny, and his artwork was just so iconic for me. And anyway, so that's where I was sort of heading. And when I was 5, The Muppet Show went to air for the first time. And so I saw these puppets, and I'm like, oh my God, I was already used to Sesame Street, but I wasn't really interested in puppet building at that point. It was the whole thing about these puppets in a theater, putting on shows and having guests, that kind of really spoke to me. And there was a character called Uncle Deadly who appeared in the first season as the Phantom of the Theater. And when I saw that character, I was like, I want to make him. I want to build that. So it was a little bit of time after that one of my aunts taught me to sew and how to sort of like look at patterns for soft toys and turn them into puppets. And so I went down that route for a while. And back in the mid 70s, late 70s, no internet, no way of knowing how to make a Muppet because there was no information. If something came on TV, I couldn't record it because we didn't have a video recorder. They didn't exist. And so it was just like having to guess how these things were done. I had no information. So I would get books out of the library that had soft toy patterns, and I would convert those into puppets. And then I started making my own designs, and then I started getting into, as I became a teenager, I started to get into Fangoria magazine and horror movies, and I really wanted to be a creature maker, a monster maker. And so I learned how to sculpt and learned how to make molds and cast things in latex rubber. And I was going down that route when I'd been doing drama at high school, and my drama teacher decided I would be a really good fit for a show that production that were doing of Bugsy Malone. Nice. And so he cast me as a character called Babyface in that, and I got the acting bug. Okay. And that was it. I put everything aside to do with puppets, to do with art, and just became obsessed with singing, and I started training professionally as a singer. And then my first gig was joining the chorus of the New Zealand Opera Company. And nice. I did that for a few years and was doing musicals at the same time. So, yeah. So anyway, in terms of puppets, fast forward to when I'm in my 40s, mid 40s. And so 8 years ago, a company here called Woe Studios was setting up. It was a new startup. They're creating a theater venue that they were going to be putting on live shows featuring puppet characters that have been specifically designed. Yeah, it was like, it's really cool. They had this beautiful set, theater set that was really elaborate and absolutely amazing. It was a treehouse sort of set. And a friend of mine had been cast in the first round of auditions for the place. And she was like, I know you love puppets. You should really go for this. And they kind of shut down for a little bit, and then they came back, and then they held auditions. And so I applied, and I was like, I better find out how puppets are made professionally. So I found a YouTube channel run by Adam Krutinger, who's just recently passed away. Yes. Yeah. So really, really sad, a loss to the puppet community. And I was like, okay, all right, cool. That's how you do it. So I designed this monster character, built it, rehearsed with it, went and auditioned, and I got cast as this character called Custard, who was like the leader of the gang of these kids. So he's like an 8-year-old boy. Hi, my name's Custard. How are you? And I ended up there at Woe Studios for 4 years, full-time doing live shows. We also did a couple of seasons of a TV show, learned a lot about puppets. I built puppets for the company. I started submitting puppets that I was creating, and I just dove into that whole world. And it was from that company, the producer of one of the seasons of the TV series, she was also the New Zealand producer for Sweet Tooth, Netflix's Sweet Tooth. Yes. And so she brought me on board for season 1 to be part of the Bobby Puppeteer team. And then so it went from there for me. Man, it's kind of crazy, very circuitous route.
No, yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, the way everything happened, because I mean, you wanted to, create a creature, or when you first started off, I mean, you were trying to get into puppets. You put that on hold, so you did the acting thing. So, I mean, the way the timing went, I mean, are you kind of glad it happened that way?
Yeah, I mean, like, I admittedly struggled a lot as an actor. I mean, like, it was there were points throughout my career where really I should have actually just let it all go and given up, because it wasn't working out. I wasn't getting cast. A lot of competition for roles, and it just wasn't happening. And it didn't happen in London. I got bits and pieces. And when I came home, I was very much like, what am I going to do? I went and worked for the New Zealand Police for 3 years as a emergency call taker. So basically taking emergency calls. I did that. I just completely was pretty much out of the business for 3 years. And then came back and went to drama school and did that for 3 years. Because I was like, what am I going to do? I want to stay in the business, but I feel like I'm really sort of raw and I need to get focused. And so in my late 30s, I ended up auditioning for drama school and going to drama school with people half my age.
Yeah.
And it was one of my classmates who had encouraged me to audition for Woe Studios. So I have her to thank for that opportunity.
Look at that, man.
Yeah.
No, and that's the thing too, because when it comes to arts or being an actor, when my kids were younger, I'll say this, when they're growing up, my oldest was like, oh, Dad, I want to be a model, and my youngest, she started saying the same thing. I mean, of course, she's trying to be like her sister. And, my oldest was like, oh, you can't be a model. You got to look like this. And I said, baby, there's all sorts of models. You got hand models. It just doesn't have to be, and you can, there's different, scenarios. I mean, look at the way it's changed now. Now they got, plus size, and they got like bigger sizes for the everyday Joe, right? So it's not just the slim look that everybody goes for nowadays. But the same thing with acting. There's something for everybody. It's I still go skateboarding. I'm still as bad as I was in the 80s, but I still go out there, man. And, I kind of catch myself because there's people of all ages. There's kids, there's, of course the parents are there, but it's just like, it's something that everybody relates to in the skateboarding. Same thing
Absolutely.
with acting, same thing with puppeteers, because you're going to meet people from all walks of life. So, different ages. I mean, it's crazy, but yeah, the fact that they encourage you to do so, man. I mean, you definitely got that opportunity. And, I wanted to get a little bit more backstory, but I'm going to plug in this because of the fact that you got to work on this new film that this doll, of course, is the star of, I would say. How ecstatic was that, man? I mean, how did you get that part? Let me ask you that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so let me see. I think I had wrapped the third season of Sweet Tooth. I had done the movie M3GAN, worked as puppeteer on M3GAN. And I'd also done another project as well. So things were going well. I was at the point that Jenny Penn came along, I graduated from making Muppet-style puppets because I was, Muppets, hand and rod puppets were absolutely the thing that got me into puppetry. But I've always been more interested in creature puppetry and those kinds of puppets. There are so many hand puppet characters out there and people doing that style that it feels like trying to compete as an actor again for roles. And there are so many talented people doing it as well. And but more than that, it was just for me more interested in the creature stuff. So I had started teaching myself to sculpt again, but in the 3D space. Okay. So sculpting characters, I got myself a 3D printer. I started creating action figures, just learning how to mechanically create things that come together once you printed them. And then also started to learn how to make molds of things that I'd sculpted that could potentially then be cast in silicon rubber, for instance. So all of that in the 3D space. So it was at that point that I was going through all of that upskilling for myself, just learning on my own time and doing it on my own time, inspired by working with the amazing people at Sweet Tooth, but also when I did M3GAN, Adrian Moreau, Moreau Effects, he and I got on really, really well because same age, loved the same things. He had the career as in the effects industry that I would have loved to have had. And he's an incredible artist. But one day I came in with my iPad and I was like, I know you use ZBrush, the Premiere sculpting tool, which is for desktop at the time. It's now an iPad app. I said, but do you ever use your iPad for 3D sculpting? He goes, no, I haven't really found anything. I said, well, there's this app called Nomad Sculpt that everybody seems to keep raving about. I was wondering what you might think of it. And so he downloaded it and he started messing about and he goes, this is really, really great. So we would, in our downtime during shooting of M3GAN, whilst waiting to go on stage, we would sit together and he taught me how to 3D sculpt. So we'd have our iPads and we'd be doing stuff. And so I'm learning from one of the best, he's an Oscar-winning effects artist, one of the best sculptors in the business, is teaching me how to do this. And then I was like, okay, I think I'm getting the hang of this. And then I just went from there, and just like the training wheels were off, and I just went and did my own thing. And what had happened was I had done 2 short films about the time that we shot M3GAN.
Nice.
And the writer producer of those short films is friends with Catherine Fitzgerald, producer of Jenny Penn. And so Michelle Powers, the name of the connection. And so Michelle gets in touch and she goes, I have a friend who's a producer. She's making a movie. They need a guy, somebody who can make the puppet for the film. I want to connect you guys, but I'm not going to tell you a thing about it. I'm not going to say anything.
Wow.
And so she connects me, and it was via email, if I remember correctly. And Catherine was like, yes, we've got this director, James Ashcroft. He's making a movie called The Rule of Jenny Penn. We're interested in chatting with you. And she was setting up a Zoom call, but she gave no further details than that. And I was like, James Ashcroft, I know that name. So I found his movie, Coming Home in the Dark, and watched it, and was like, okay, it's a thriller. And then the 15-minute point hits, and I'm like, there's this incredible thing that happens at the 15-minute mark where I was like, you have my attention. This is going to be insane. And by the end of the film, I was like, I want to work with this guy. So anyway, so we have a Zoom. It's me, Catherine, and James, and Orlando Stewart, the other producer on the movie. And James is awesome, and we're chatting. And then he just casually mentions that John Lithgow and Jeffrey Rush are starring in the film. And I was like, say what now? And John Lithgow is one of my favorite actors in the world. Like, I adore that guy. And I was like, you want me to make a puppet for John Lithgow? And they're like, yeah. So we had this great conversation. They seemed really happy to use me, even though, you know, I was talking about stuff that I was going to do to create the puppets that was a little bit untested by me. I hadn't done too much of it, but I felt very confident that I could produce what they needed, because it was a whole range of puppets. It wasn't just one doll. It's a bunch, and different expressions and different things they needed to do and different scales. And so yeah, that's how I got Jenny Penn. And it was it took up about, from the time that I started work on it, about 4 months of my life, maybe 5 months. So it was a big chunk of 2023. Yeah.
Man. And of course, I mean, did you got to meet the guy?
Oh yeah, I got to train him in puppetry.
Yeah, I had read that, and I said, man, how surreal was that? Because I mean, here you are, you know, it's just, you know, myself, I mean, here in Texas, you know, I'm a moderator, you know, I do Q&A panels. I get to meet the actors, you know, from films of past, from the 80s, from, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Return of the Living Dead. And there I am standing in front of them thinking like, man, like, well, you know what I would have done back in the 80s to have met these people, and I get to meet them now, you know. So it's a great feeling, man. You know, you got to love it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And John was great. And I I put that in the post that I put up on Instagram, but I just found myself gushing and just talking about Blowout, which was the movie that I first made me realize that like who John Lithgow was, and he terrified me. But then it was just like seeing him all, you know, The World According to Garp, and so many other great roles that he's played. And I loved Third Rock from the Sun. Never missed an episode. Absolutely loved it. And the whole cast is great, but I thought he was just fantastic. And so gush, and he was just like very kind. You're so kind, Paul. That's very kind. And so yeah, he was lovely to work with. Really, really lovely to work with.
No,
And,
you see, and being a great actor, like you mentioned, because I mean, I've seen a lot of his work. I've seen a lot of his films, and when I saw that he was actually the lead on this one, I was like, man, I want to see this. I mean, it's just the role, you know. It's just like I can see him playing it, of course, you know. So now it's like, you know, the film, I'm waiting for it. You know, it's actually one that I'm looking forward to this year. You know, I'm not gonna lie, but the fact that he's in it, you know, there's a lot of great actors, you know, actresses in there as well. So it's just it's gonna be one for the records, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. I haven't seen it yet. So I
Oh,
get to
man.
see it in a couple of weeks. Yeah.
Wow. And of course, how hard was it for him to learn this? I mean, you had to teach him, so did he pick it up pretty quick?
He picked it up real fast. And like I flew down to Wellington about a week and a half, 2 weeks out from filming. I can't quite remember. And I had a couple of these little Jenny pens with me. And they weren't quite, we were still sort of like finalizing their look.
Yeah.
So they weren't quite finished. And so yeah, I had them with me, and it was on Halloween as well. So it was kind of fun that Halloween was when I had these dolls with me on the plane. And like, it's a good thing I didn't go through a security with X-rays machines, because they would have seen this guy. Who is this guy? Anyway, yeah. So we had limited time together, but he is such a fan of puppetry, and he talked about experiences with puppets when he was younger, and
Wow.
when he started playing with Jenny, because the two of us sitting there, we've each got a Jenny on our hand, and we're talking about performance and all the stuff that he needed to sort of like be aware of while he was performing with her. You know, how she'll look on camera. He's, you know, the ability, because his character spends a lot of time. Well, not a lot. I mean, just trying to remember, because like I said, I haven't seen the film.
Right.
But there are times when the puppet is looking in one direction, but he's looking in another. So it's that thing of having that peripheral sort of
Right.
sense of watch where she's looking and what she's doing. So we were working all through that, and it was like, oh, he's picking this up real fast. And I was actually due to be on set every day with him, helping him, looking after the Jenny pens, guiding his performance if he needed it. I mean, like,
Right.
he's a great actor. I don't need to tell him how to do anything. but it would be more things like, oh, just lift Jenny's head up in this moment, or things like that.
Right.
And when we left that session where it was like, he's going to do great. And on the first day on location at Wairaki and Taupo, at the resort there where the retirement village was set was, there was one shot that he did on the first day that I was there, where his character has Jenny on his non-dominant hand, on his left hand. So you know, he was used to puppeteering, but he had her on his left hand, and he's having to do a shot where he's looking around through a glass door, and then he has Jenny do that as well, and he nailed her angle and where she was looking and everything. And I was like, he doesn't need me. and sure enough, the producers came to me and they said, look, we don't really think we need you on set at the moment, and budget wise it'd probably be really great if we could actually, you know, save some money and have you focusing on building your puppet, because I had one puppet left to build, the most complicated one. John's doing great. John feels confident. And I was like, yeah, I think he's going to do great. That's not a problem at all. And so, yeah, so I went home, but I went down in the final week of filming to Wellington, to Stone Street Studios. And there was some puppetry in the film that I was scheduled to do instead of John. So working with the bigger puppet that I built, and also working with this little one, or not this particular little one, but the hero version, where there were certain sequences where the way to achieve the effect in camera was to have an additional puppeteer working with John. So, and I won't spoil what that is, but so I got to actually be an extension of John in those scenes. Yeah, so I'm actually working with John. And so yeah, so I puppeteer Jenny Penn in parts of the movie myself. So that's really cool too. Man, and that was for more complicated moments, where it would just make more sense that I do it instead. Yeah.
Man, well, I mean, the fact that you got to meet the man, you know, that's pretty damn good. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
Of course, getting to meet him and then work with him at the end of the, towards the film, man, that's actually pretty cool. I mean, that's something
Yeah.
that nobody can take away from you now. It happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's an awesome human being, and just such so what am I trying to say? Inspiring. He's just like, I mean, he's just got an Olivier nomination for his role as Roald Dahl in the West End. He's doing a play in the West End at the moment. He makes it seem so effortless that they just throw award nominations at him, and it's like, of course he got nominated. He's that great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, definitely. I mean, like I said earlier, the fact that I can easily see him play that character. I was just like, damn, I want to see this. I mean, seems like a great guy. I mean, when you guys were out there, I mean, did you guys get to talk a little bit? I mean, as far as outside film, I mean, as far as
a little bit. When I started filming, when we all started filming, I did at one point get to sit down. I was just kind of like, I just randomly was lucky. I was having dinner in the restaurant at the resort, and New Zealand actor George Henry joined me. I'd actually worked as an actor with George doing a tour of a musical years before Jenny Penn.
Wow, nice.
And I also kind of knew him just here and there. And if we ever bumped into each other on the street, because the two of us don't have cars, so we'd often be like, I'd often sort of like bump into him walking around Auckland or on public transport. We'd often just say hi to each other, and then we get to work on Jenny Penn, so it's just like, oh, this is amazing. And I get to build the puppet that's tormenting him in the movie, because he's one of the supporting leads. And anyway, so he and I are chatting, and then Jeffrey was like, he came along and he's like, do you mind if I join you guys? Like, of course, please come and sit down and join us. And he's more interested in talking to George than myself, but I mean, it was nice. And then John comes along and it was just like, so I'm talking to these three amazing actors, and very much feeling like the odd one out and not really worthy of being there. So we got to chat for like 15 minutes or so, and then the three of them went and had dinner together because they were, wanting to have that time together. They were bonding. They were, wanting to talk shop and talk characters and stuff like that. So I wasn't invited to that, but that's fine because I got to spend time just in that moment. So that was, apart from being like at lunchtime when everybody's kind of sitting, John and I would sit sometimes together and just have a little bit of a chat. But once I went away, I didn't see them for weeks. I think it was like 5 weeks. And then I joined them in the 6th week, and only got to see him a little bit during that time, except when I was on set.
Man, well, that's, I mean, definitely a good experience, man.
Yeah.
Man, I was going to backtrack a little bit because, of course, like you mentioned earlier, you have worked on a few other films. M3GAN was one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, for your time on there, I mean, how did you go about, because it was for Puppeteer, so what parts did you work on that film?
So, with M3GAN, the puppet was originally going to be this very complicated, fully articulated puppet. So like everything was going to have built-in robotic movement. And then that changed in the weeks leading up to filming, and they had to actually scrap everything from the neck down. I can't quite remember what the reason was. Maybe there was it might have been a budgetary thing, because it required quite a few puppeteers. So what they basically did was they scrapped everything animatronic from the neck down, kept the very complicated head, and the rest of the animatronic, well, there were several animatronics. Right. It was essentially a rod puppet. So her head was controlled by a rod. Her body was, if it wasn't locked off, it was controlled by a rod on a gimbal. It was like a gimbal. It was right. Like we had this small crane arm that was really designed for cameras, but it was modified to be able to support her. So it could roll along and she'd be on it and she'd kind of float, and we'd just make her look like she's walking. Right. And her arms had rods as well. The budget wasn't so high for that film that they could actually afford to paint me out. So I had to hide myself either behind her or lie beneath her to be able to do the physical puppetry of her head and body. And so if, sometimes there'd be two cameras and they're like, Paul, we can see your hair, or Paul, we can see you. And I wouldn't be able to drop down. I'd be having to like scrunch myself up trying to puppeteer her. And so, yeah, if in the movie, there are many shots where it's like, I am directly behind the puppet, like puppeteering her. And then there are three puppeteers, Adrian, his wife, Kathy, and also Devin, off camera, and they had the radio controls and they were doing all the expressions. Her dialogue was automated. They worked very hard each night because there would be dialogue changes. They'd have to program in the lip sync and the mouth movements, and that took them a long time. So they controlled how she looked, and I controlled how her head moved, her body moved. And then we occasionally had our PA, Craig, was sometimes roped in as an assistant puppeteer for me, and he'd be doing arms and stuff like that. A job he wasn't expecting to do. So it'd be like, okay, here's a crash course in puppetry. And he did great. He did great, bless him. He was really, really patient, and he mucked in. Yeah.
And of course, having that many people work on M3GAN, I mean, was it? I don't want to say was it hard, but I mean, of course, you guys had to be in sync and know exactly what to do at what time, right? So how did you guys go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, we did rehearsal. I mean, one of the things we found, and this often happened on Sweet Tooth as well, when working with a team of puppeteers for one character, is that after a while you start to understand how the character behaves, and you kind of just then go into a second nature. This is how her head will move on this particular line or whatever. You start to actually just do it because you're feeling what the character, you've got used to how the character moves. Kathy, Adrian's wife, was the lead puppeteer, so she guided the performance, and she'd be like, okay, I'd like to see this, or let's do this. And then sometimes we never spoke to each other. We just actually worked as a team, and it just all came together. And there were some really lovely moments in the film where, like, I see those moments as like, oh yeah, that's when we said nothing to each other, and it just worked. So yeah, I mean, there's an exercise actors will do when they're sort of like getting together, say for theater, a theater production, and they're in rehearsal and they're learning to work together. It's called flocking, and basically you're moving around as a group, and somebody initiates a movement. Say they might start flapping their wings. It's called flocking, and everybody else then is to copy that movement. But the idea is that the gap between the person initiating the movement and the rest copying that movement is so seamless that it looks like everybody is changing movement as one. And so the idea is that you become in sync, you become very connected to each other. And that's how, as puppeteers, you get after a while of working with the same character. You start to understand how each other functions, and we're going to lean in like this, and we're going to do this. So on Sweet Tooth with Bobby, it was like that with Laura Trundle, who was the other physical puppeteer, with myself on Bobby on set. And then we had Eddie Fleming, and also another puppeteer for the other season. I think that was Grant. And also, who else did we have? Oh, Bobby didn't appear that much in season 3, that's right. But on season 2. So yeah, so Eddie had the hardest job because he was working offset and watching on camera on a monitor, and I couldn't talk to him. We didn't have a means to actually communicate with each other via radio. So we had to learn to all sort of like work together and be in the moment. But we'd sometimes talk about what was going to happen in the scene and stuff. But Laura and I were really good at just like being in sync together on set and making it happen. Yeah.
No, for sure. And it reminded me, I mean, not that it was anything remotely close to what you guys were doing, but I mean, I've helped productions here in San Antonio and working the boomstick. The director's like, man, stay by me. If I move, you move. And there I am. And the whole time I'm looking forward, but my peripheral vision, I'm looking to see what they're doing. And so I'm moving. Every once in a while we bump, but it's just like, you know what, like you got, you got to follow their lead, so if they move a certain way, there I go, but I can imagine and I can relate to that because you want to make sure, like you said, the first person to initiate, you just follow, keep going. the fact that everybody kind of, I guess, gets used to it, right? I mean, years of
Yeah,
doing it and training, and after a while, you're like, oh, okay, just
yeah, that's it.
rock together,
That's
man.
it. Yeah,
Man,
it's learning the physicality of the puppet as well, what its limits are, what
yeah,
strengths it has, the way that it moves. It might not be able to, its shoulder might lock at a certain point. So how do we work within that? It's all that stuff you get used to. What 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 is the what are the limitations before we potentially break the puppet? It's all that kind of. You have to be very, very. You can't assume that the puppet is bulletproof.
right.
So you can't just push it in any direction and be like, we'll just do this. You can't. You've got to treat it like it's a child, and that it might break if you are too rough with it.
Oh yeah,
So yeah, so it's all that, but also just things like I was mentored by Peter Linz, who plays Ernie on Sesame Street at the start of my career. He came down and actually mentored us for the TV show that we shot at Woe Studios. We also had Jeremy Dillon, who's a well-known puppeteer here in New Zealand, mentoring us as well. But Peter was the main mentor, and he taught us the fundamentals of screen puppetry, of having a puppet who was on camera. And it's that thing of like, I'll take this lady off, but it's having that 3/4 view when you never do this, because then you lose the eyes. And
oh yeah,
so it's the tricks of having a puppet being able to look at something else and it looks like it's looking at them, but it'll actually be, looking in a completely different direction. So it's all the thing of like, how does it behave, to bring it to life, and just being super aware of all that. And that was one of the things that I applied to M3GAN. It was like keeping her head, instead of having her head like this, I would just tilt it slightly so
yeah.
it was
Oh
more
yeah,
like that, so that both her eyes were in the shot and not losing anything, unless that was what was required.
right,
So
right.
yeah, and just like what were her strongest, what are some really great angles that really, really sell her character. So I was constantly aware of that, but that went back to those fundamentals of screen puppetry.
Man, that's amazing. But yeah, I'm sure that's the one of the tricks of the trade. I mean, being able to know like where they're looking at, or make sure their eyes are, like you say, there's not just like one eye showing, but both.
Yeah,
Because I didn't even think about it, but yeah, now looking back at films like that, I mean, it makes sense because it does give you that, like, man, they're looking at something. It's not
yeah,
just like head turning; it's just like they're kind of in that angle and just looking at something that's on that direction. But well, that's pretty amazing. I like that. I love puppets. I mean, of course, growing up as a kid, hand puppets. The Muppets. Of course, back in the day, we used to have a PBS channel, so everything on there was pinwheels. Just programs that had like Puppeteer and a lot of people working. Doing the animation for one thing, and that's one thing I guess where my love for actual puppets, or when it comes to films, I love that there's people behind there. I
yeah.
mean, CGI, of course, AI doing this, doing this thing now. But for me, it's like, man, like I enjoy it more knowing that there's somebody behind that puppet or that character or that mask.
That's exactly it. I mean, like take M3GAN as an example. So you got the animatronic, but you've also got Amy Donald, who
Oh yeah,
was 11 when
yep,
when we started filming M3GAN. She was tiny, and actually, as a side thing, Amy and I have worked together multiple times now because she was on Sweet Tooth,
yep,
and
yeah.
she played two characters on Sweet Tooth, both of whom I puppeteered because she had puppeteering elements on for her
Oh,
character.
it's,
So one of her characters, Maya Monkey, had a tail that was animatronic, so I puppeteered that. And then for season 3, she was also a wolf boy character, and so I would puppeteer her animatronic face. And
oh man,
so we're friends. I'm friends with the family, um, and so that's a really great example of like working with an actor as well, and being part of their performance, being respectful of their performance, but working with them and trying to bring out the best of the character that, as the two of us, we're trying to produce. And I love working with Amy because she's a dancer, she's a stunt person as well. She's got a great physicality and she's able to move in the suits and so forth. And
oh
so
yeah,
So when she did M3GAN, of course she's going to do the iconic dance, and which was, you know, the thing that went viral for her. But like the point that I was going to make was that the audience, knowing that there was a child playing M3GAN, somebody that they can meet, they can go to a convention and meet,
Oh yeah.
and actually hear her tell her stories of what it was like to shoot that role. And of course, she's in the sequel M3GAN 2.0, which I wasn't part of. I didn't get to be part of that one. And yeah, that was, damn. They didn't need me. And also the animatronic M3GAN as well was, I think she's still on display. Is it at Universal Orlando? And so people can go and look at the puppet that was on set interacting with the actors, you know, killing the actors and all that sort of stuff. They can actually see the puppet that was there working with them. And it's tangible, and it's something you could reach out and potentially touch if it wasn't behind a display case. Whereas if it was CGI or AI generated, there's nothing. There's nothing.
How can you take that to a convention? You know, it's just like, there's a screen. Look at the screen. You know, I mean, but that's true though. I didn't even think about that, but it makes sense because I mean, she's been attending conventions, and you know, and you mentioned her physicality because the way she moves, it's mind-boggling. Like I had no idea that was a person. You know, like I mean, it's just you know, it's amazing, and definitely I mean, she's great at what she does. You know, and young too. So she, you know, there's still a lot of years. You know, we're gonna be amazed throughout the years coming. You know, can't wait to see what else she does.
Yeah.
I was gonna plug this in on there. I have a where is it? Local guy. He actually, I think we covered this, but he asked, how did you get your first start, and who was your inspiration to get into puppeteer work?
Well, I'll touch on the inspiration part. I mean, like definitely Jim Henson, of course. I mean, like, I was. Let me see. Sesame Street went to air 2 months before I was born. So, you know, I grew up with Sesame Street being brand new. And then I was 5 when the Muppet Show went to air, and that was really the one for me, like I said. And just the fact that he was a filmmaker, you know, he didn't, you know, puppetry was part of what he did, and he had, you know, these things he wanted to do and to create. You know, he took a big chance with the Dark Crystal, for instance, and Dark Crystal was really what started getting me wanting to go from Muppet style puppets to creature stuff. That really, because I was 13 and I was already into horror films and so forth, but just watching, there's a documentary, hour-long documentary, which goes quite in depth into how they created the world of the Dark Crystal. And that was really inspiring to me. So yeah, absolutely. And I would love to say that I have a breadth of knowledge of puppetry around the world and other famous puppeteers, but I was very, very locked into, you know, Jim Henson's creations and the people that worked for him, and then I moved on. My inspirations were people like Rick Baker, Rob Bottin, all those greats as well. So, you know, then the creature stuff, the Phil Tippett's and.
No, for sure. And I was going to say too, because even I mean, as a kid, you know, growing up watching this, I mean, I had no idea what went behind the scenes. It wasn't until years later, and they start showing a lot of behind the scenes, and I'm like, man, I'm amazed because there's so many people having to work to make these things happen, and I was like, wow, man, like the whole time, you know, like 2 people per puppet. I mean, it was just it was amazing, you know, because it's like, I mean, as a kid, you don't see what's going on, but it's just the work and the time, and you know, everything made everything happen, you know, and I mean, I still enjoy it, you know. I think I still have a few VHS with the Muppets, the movie, you know, that I still throw on from time to time just to you know, nostalgia, man. But let me ask you, there was another film that you worked on that I actually did get to watch, and this is The Tank. So
right.
Yeah, so how did you go about getting into that one? Let me ask you that.
That's actually, let me try and think. I was recommended for it because I was reached out to by one of the producers, and I think it was off the back Sweet Tooth. I was shooting. It was between seasons 2 and 3 of shooting Sweet Tooth, I think. I actually can't remember. And yeah, they just needed. It was a low budget film, and so it was a very simple setup. They had a circus performer in a creature suit, which didn't have an animatronic head, who did all the most of the work, and then there was this insert head that was a very, very basic puppet. It was Shane Rangi, who is a well-known creature suit performer. He's done like Avatar, and he's done like the Narnia Chronicles, and he's done so much stuff. He handled the physicality of the puppet head, and it was my job to handle the movements of like the jaws and so forth like that. And it was what I loved about it was it just harked back. It was just a cable operated character. There's no radio controls. It was just levers with bike cables, essentially, moving parts. Just the stuff I love about creature puppets. And so, yeah, designed and built by Weta. So it was my first time working with a Weta creature. And so, yeah, I was only on that movie for whenever the puppet head was doing its thing.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it was fun. We were out on location. We were in the woods. We were in a studio doing it. I was kind of gutted. All the scenes that took place in the actual tank itself in the water with the puppet head, I had to miss that day's filming because I was actually booked on a different project, and dates kept shifting around, and I kept trying to make it work, and dates kept shifting, and then eventually just one of the productions said no, it has to be this date, and then it so yeah, somebody else had to go in and do it for me, and but I'm kind of glad because it was like working in water, and apparently it was all mucky and horrible and just a bit of a
Oh yeah, you could have done without it, right?
Yeah. So the head was quite heavy, and so Shane, big powerful guy, so he guided the head. But I remember the one thing I didn't expect was that I came on board as the puppeteer, but what I didn't expect was I was expected to maintain the puppet as well, to actually take care of it. And so I turn up, and they're like, "Oh, so we've got a 3-hour Zoom with the guys at Weta who built it. They're going to take you through how to break down the puppet and do the maintenance should it need it." I'm like, "Say what now?" So there was this manual about that thick, it seemed, waiting for me. And so I talked to the guys, and we literally broke down the head into all its component pieces.
Wow.
And so that I understood how to do it by myself. It had to be done in certain stages.
Right.
You couldn't just arbitrarily undo bolts. You actually had to do it like this one first, and then this part comes out, and so forth. So I had to do all that. I had the manual to remind me how to do things. But I ended up actually, because of all the slime, I actually had to do that quite a bit to clean it. Yeah. So and that was actually really great at giving me confidence at working with mechanics, not just the puppet itself, but also the mechanics of the puppet, and not being afraid of diving into them. And also it was great for giving me an overview of, like, if I'm going to build something myself, how would I do this? And so that actually kind of fed into this, because I was a one-person team building all the puppets for this movie, and one of them was kind of an animatronic, and so it gave me confidence to actually tackle that.
Nice, man. And of course, I mean, you got to keep the dog, but I mean, throughout the films, I mean, do you get to keep certain parts or?
No, I was very lucky. I was given this one, which John broke during one of the scenes, and it's all been glued back together. She's 3D printed, and I thought I'd use the material that could take a few knocks, but no, he went for it, and she got cracked. which is great. I had multiples. I made multiple versions on the off chance that one would break. And luckily, the hero version, the main one that he worked with the entire time, she never got damaged at all.
Oh, nice.
And that one went to James Ashcroft. The bigger version as well, which is almost twice the size of this one, I got to keep, and then I got to keep the animatronic head as well. So I've got actually 3 different versions of her here, and that's really unusual. Normally, the studio keeps the assets. Yeah, so you don't get to keep them. They paid for you to build them. They bought them essentially. It's their asset,
right?
Yeah. So yeah, great to have a memento. I mean, like the thing is, I could always make my own. I built the whole thing. I've got the patterns for the body. I've got the files for the head and the hands. I could always just print off another one. You know, that's what I was thinking. Was like, I'll just make myself a version that I can have around the house. But then I got to keep a bunch. So
you see, and that one got broken by John. So of course, there's a little sentimental value, man.
yeah. I love that he broke it. I coveted this one in some ways more than the hero one, because it's like he broke it. It's, you know, she's got these cracks in her, you know, that you can only just see. So a nice story to sort of like tell people about her.
No, for sure. And I mean, let me ask you this: when it comes to conventions, have you ever attended a convention? Because
no one's ever asked me.
No, man.
No,
okay.
I would love to. I would love to go to a convention.
I mean, I'm you know, because there's I mean, it's picked up momentum. I mean, all last year, you know, it's just like people, actors out of the woodwork just started like popping up and doing them, you know. So it's just like if you got something that, you know, part of a film, I mean, why not? You know, people want to hear about those behind the scenes shots, you know, the conversations, who they met, how they felt. I mean, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that I'm like, here, I've jumped on quite a few projects here locally, and I'm usually the BTS guy, so I'm taking video, photos. I share what I'm allowed to, of course. You know, I always have the directors, but I catch moments there. You know, the actors are like, "Man, that's perfect." You know, like I'm glad you caught that. But you know, it's fun, man, and I mean, I'm sure people would be willing, because even now, you know, the conversation we had was freaking superb. You know, I mean, people would be out there wanting to talk and ask, and you know, maybe even get some pointers. You know, as far as how to go about doing what you do.
And once a Minecraft movie comes out, I'll be able to talk about my involvement with that one a little bit more as well, because that was a cool experience too. And it's already very fun just seeing all the bits and pieces that are coming out. I was, because of what I did on it, I was interviewed by the official behind the scenes. Whether I get included in all the stuff that drops about that, but keep an eye out for the behind the scenes footage anyway, because you'll probably see me on set doing what I was doing.
Nice.
But yeah, that was a really fun one. But yeah, I mean, like, I've always loved the idea of attending a convention, and I think I've got enough different projects behind me now.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it's like, I mean, like, if anyone wants to, you know, invite me on board, I'd be happy to participate for sure.
No, but let's hope so, man. I mean, you know, it's the year's still young. You know, it's still the beginning. So hopefully, you know, before the year wraps up, and of course, you know, if you're available, you know, if you're not working, then why not? You know, let's keep you busy, man.
Yeah, 100%.
And let me.
I was going to say just going back to the Muppets for a second. One of the projects that I did last year that was just a pleasure, because I finally got to perform with a Muppet, was working with Coldplay, because I was on stage with Coldplay, Music of the Spheres tour, because they've got Muppets as part of that. And wherever they go in the world, they pick up local puppeteers to join the 2 full-time puppeteers that they've got as part of the tour.
Oh, nice.
And so when they came here to New Zealand, myself and 3 of my friends got to be on stage with Coldplay with these Muppets, these incredible puppets. So I was like, finally get to work with an actual Muppet. Yeah.
Man, let me ask you this, because during like every job that you've had, I mean, having to go out there and perform and do what you do, I mean, do you have any BTS shots of you behind the scenes?
There's some stuff. I mean, like, I post as much as I can on my Instagram. That's my portfolio essentially, and where where I promote what I do, and but I find that unless I make an effort, yeah, usually I finish a project and I'm like, damn, I wish I'd got somebody to take photos. Wish I'd got a photo with this person or whatever. It's like I've just done a commercial. I spent most of February on a commercial for an iconic New Zealand brand that's and the ad campaign is dropping next week. And I built a type of puppet I've never built before, and I was super happy with it. And I'm really excited for people to see it. And I'll post about it on Instagram because overseas viewers won't be able to see the commercials, of course.
Right.
But I realized by the end of the campaign, once it was done, I never got a photo with the puppet. So my own puppet, I don't even have a photograph with, let alone, but I got lots of, I did make sure that I took, because I was on set, I didn't puppeteer it because that wasn't how it was set up to be. I just designed and built it. And it'll make sense when you see the ad. But so I was actually in a position to take video and photos then. So I probably have, quite a bit that I can share that actually shows what went on. But when I'm building puppets, I'm finding that I'm often so focused doing what I'm doing that I forget to, record the stages. Yeah.
And that's where I come in, because I've been covering combat sports for years, and my thing was always getting photos of the fighters behind the scenes before they, them warming up, getting their hands wrapped, and it's moments like that, because I would share them after the event, and the fighters are like, man, I had no idea you were there, man. Like, that's great, that's awesome, and but I've always been a big fan of doing that, because like, people ask me like, oh, have you ever been here? Have you ever done that? And I'm like, yeah, and they're like, oh, you got photos? And I'm like, no. I mean, nobody was there, and so it's just, I mean, that's why I started doing it, covering fights. I mean, I never charged for my photos. I never charged for my video. I said, man, they put enough to go in there and compete. At least I can do is, give them something. And, it's been great. I still do it, but that's, I enjoy it, man. And I'm hoping, who knows, maybe people start popping up and posting photos of you, behind the scenes, man. There's got to be something out there.
Yeah. It's just to have the record of it is, it's kind of, I was married once, and I kind of sort of like equated to when I got married, and on the day passes so quickly, your wedding day, that if you don't have anybody taking photos and video, there'll be moments that you don't see, you don't know, because there's so much to focus on, and it's only later that you get to appreciate it because you got somebody to take video and you got somebody to take photos, and other people took photos as well. So it's kind of similar with what I do. If nobody records it, then the only record you have is the product itself, the film, the ad, the TV show, or whatever, but not what happened. And like on Sweet Tooth, where it was such a big team working on all, I love working in a team, and to be able to, so I tried on Sweet Tooth as much as possible to take a lot of photos and stuff. I'm not in the photos, but other people are, of all the amazing work that they did. Yeah.
No, for sure. I have one more question. Let me see.
Yes.
Johnny, be good. As a fellow maker myself, do you have any advice for someone who's trying to make it? Would love nothing more than to see my work on the big screen one day.
I know, right? I feel very, very lucky that I've just had a chance to work with people who then recommend me to people who recommend me to people. And in New Zealand, it's a small industry. There's not many people working as puppeteers in New Zealand, and there's even fewer who work as puppet makers and puppeteers, and then even fewer again who are doing like stage and screen like I do. And so a big part of it is luck and just connections. But I would say use platforms to put your stuff out there. I don't, but use YouTube. Make videos of how you create your work. Make videos of the characters performing if you're a puppeteer. Use Instagram. Use Reels on Instagram, because people tend to watch video. Use stories. Video always gets more of a grab than photos. But just and don't be backwards in promoting your work. There's a lot of artists here in New Zealand who seem very shy about promoting themselves, and I think you're absolutely incredible. Why aren't you promoting what you do? Because this stuff is amazing. And if it was me, I'd be putting it out there, just saying this is what I
I
do,
agree.
and that's why I'm not really shy about posting as much as I do on Instagram. And I have got jobs through Instagram. The ad that I just worked on came via Instagram.
Man,
And
there you go.
there have been times, yeah. So
Yeah.
promote yourself essentially is my best advice.
No,
Yeah.
for sure. And that's one of the things I struggle with myself. I mean, because I do quite a bit and I'm everywhere. You know, I'm a commentator for MMA. You know, I'm a moderator. I do some voiceovers. I do acting. I jump on everything. I do BTS. And it's like, you know, people keep asking me, keep telling me. And I'm like, man, for me, this is what I get a thrill out of, you know, talking to you guys and the people, you know, that are making it happen. I mean, on the big screen or, you know, working their way up. I mean, it's, you know, it humbles me, you know. But when people ask me to jump on a podcast myself, I'm like, really, like me, like why me? You know, I'm not doing nothing, and they're like, bro, like you do so much, you know. But yeah, you know, it's like my mom used to say, and I'll say this, that if you don't speak, not even God can hear you. So you know, you
That's
got
right.
to talk, you got to let people know, and I mean, how do you expect people to see your work? You know,
Yeah,
makes sense.
absolutely. And it's like I'm happy for people to, if they have questions, if they're a maker who's starting out and they want to, you know, ask a question about a process, if it's something I can help with, I am more than happy for people to reach out to me. Yeah, because it's the generosity of others in sharing their knowledge that have helped me be able to do what I do. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
that pay it forward thing. And especially when it comes to the newer generations coming through, if young people are into puppets and puppetry and making puppets, man, let's encourage them
Yeah.
because we
Oh, yeah.
want that art form to carry on, to
Yeah.
continue,
And I was
and
gonna
for
say
people to
that too.
tell stories with them. Yeah,
Yeah. No, and I was going to say
100%.
that too earlier because it's a craft that not many people do. You know, there's a lot of things. You know, when I was in high school, we used to develop our own film. You know, it
Yep,
was back in the early '90s. You know, but now it's everything's digital. Now everything's, you know, hit a button and there you go. You know, we got so many apps that are creating things quickly, and it's like, yeah, it's efficient, but at the same time, like, if somebody were to say, okay, we'll use this, you know, do this without the app, then you know, how are you going to do that? You know, now
that's
you
it.
got to learn.
And with AI, it's, you know, with the video generation, it's going
Oh
to be, I mean, like already AI is, I'm noticing it's creeping into
yeah,
the process for me, that I will get storyboards or I will get character design jumping off points that have been AI generated. So they
yeah.
haven't even been sketched by an artist. They've just been prompts entered into an image generator. And I understand it works very fast and very efficiently and produces something quickly. And it means, you know, that time is not wasted. Um, and also money is saved. You don't have to pay an artist to produce the thing. But like I said, I love working in a team, and I love the fact that I would take, if I'm not designing something myself, I'm taking somebody else's thing that they've put on paper or created digitally, and then translating that into 3 dimensions, and it's a handoff process,
Yeah.
and it's artists inspiring artists, you know, and want that more. I mean, like AI is going to be great for people being able to get a vision that they've got in their head out, you know, if they lack the resources, the financial resources to do it, you know, the traditional way. Yeah, that's great, and they'll be able to make their own things. Um, but I was talking about this just recently. I'm developing something at the moment, and we're talking about that we could use the 3D space to create what we're looking at, or we could actually create the assets for real. And we're choosing to do the assets for real rather than the 3D environments and so forth, which would be easy to do. But we would rather have a tangible environment for the actors to work in and so forth. Yeah.
No, I agree because one of the things, like I used AI one time for a video edit, and I was just curious to see what it would do, and I threw it out there, and I was like, damn, I was blown away because I was like, okay, that I could have never done that, but like you said earlier, I saw what it did, and then I went and replicated that. I said, okay, well,
Right.
you know what, let me get those ideas, and I went ahead and did it my own, and yeah, you know, stuff like that, like you said. I mean, it's writers. If you're stuck and you're like, man, I don't know what to. You can throw it out there, and maybe it gives you an idea, and you're like, perfect. You know what? I'm going to go this way, or I'm going to use this angle. But yeah, for that, I mean, and everything's, it's getting memory and stuff that we're doing already. So at the same time, it's actually just coming back to it. It's just somebody else, But yeah, for inspiration, I would say go ahead. I'm not a big fan of it. I mean, CGI, it's got to be used for certain takes, but I mean, if it's like somebody were to, I think we talked about it in a podcast that I'm involved in here as well, and it was like if it's an AI movie, then I'd rather just watch a cartoon.
100%. 100%. And I mean, like,
right.
what's going to happen is that people are going to be able to, in a few short years, people are going to be creating their own short films and their own movies and their own TV shows.
Oh yeah.
Through AI, and they're going to, they, instead of like waiting for somebody else to come up with something that they would love to see, they're going to get together maybe with other people. Maybe they've got the skills to write the thing themselves and then put in all the prompts and so forth like that and generate a thing that then they will. I think it's going to be like TikTok. You're going to have these creators who have these massive audiences, but it's really fragmented because you've got so many creators, and all of them have, so many of them have big audiences, and they're famous within those audiences. But we're not going to have, there's so many famous people out there that I have no clue who these people are at all because there's so many of them. It's hard to keep track.
Yeah.
It's not like when we were younger, and it was just so much easier to keep track of who the famous people were.
Yeah.
And so it's going to fragment that audience experience of how we receive entertainment as well. We get so many people complaining about things like the direction the Marvel movies are going, but I can totally see people creating their own versions of superhero films and TV shows. Yeah. And being like, I can't stand watching what they're doing to this property. I'm just going to do this myself.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how that all goes.
No, for sure. Because I mean, that's one thing with the indie films. People are creating. They don't like something. They're like, man, I'm just going to make a fan film. Shoot my angle, and I mean, that's what they do. And I'm a big fan of indie films. So every time one pops up, I'm constantly doing reviews and just kind of plugging in what I like and I mean, just to put more information out there, content. But yeah, man, I mean, I'd rather it be man-made. I mean, of course, when it comes to 3D prints, I have friends that do that here. For something like that, I would say, like, for example, like you create something by hand, and you're like, okay, you know what? I spend hours and hours working on this. Like, I'll keep the original and I'll make some molds. I'll use a 3D printer and use some that are going to get banged up or are going to get destroyed or to sell. Somebody might be interested and want to buy one, and okay, well, you know what? I've got a few models with a 3D print. It's not the original, but it's the mold off the original, man. You can't get any better than that. So, there's purposes for everything. But yeah, just keep AI out of film.
That's it. I mean, like for something like this, even though she was sculpted in the 3D space and a 3D printer printed her, it's still very much a hands-on process. I'm hand sculpting, but in a 3D space. I'm taking this off the printer and finishing it myself. It doesn't come off the printer finished. No, I have to still prep. If I have to remove supports and clean it up, and then I paint it. It's all hand painted, and not that there's a huge amount of paint on her, but the finishing is by hand. It's just it's just a tool. But I don't use prompts to create the sculpts. I'd rather hand sculpt the thing myself. And so it's just, instead of using clay and using silicone to make molds and stuff, I'm just using a process that for me streamlines things for what I do, particularly as I work by myself.
Yeah.
So for the most part, it just makes life easier. But that's exactly it. That's the extent of my involvement in the 3D space. And
Nice. No, well, for sure, man. Well, anything you want to say? We're gonna be wrapping this up. So, anything you want to say before we call it a day, man?
No, I think I've rambled on long. Thank you so much for wanting to have a chat with me.
Yes,
I really enjoyed this. Yeah, thank you.
No, for sure. I mean, thank you for jumping on here. Like I said, I mean, I had to. When I saw you out there, I was like, oh man, I got to bring him on here. So, thank you for agreeing to jump on here. And of course, I'm going to keep plugging you in. And any projects that you're working on. I know you mentioned something earlier.
Nothing that nothing that I can talk about. I've only got
Okay.
a couple of things lined up at the
Nice.
moment for this year, but as I so often find, which is what happened with the commercial from last month,
Right.
I get not much notice often that something's coming down the pipe. So like Jenny Pan was probably the one where I had the longest lead time to actually get things done. But like and M3GAN was the same. It was a few weeks notice before I joined the team. But yeah, so often I think, oh, am I going to get any work this year? Which is what happened last year. And then I did a movie. I can't talk about the movie, but I did a movie last year that sort of like that turned up very last minute and thankfully gave me a few weeks work, and Coldplay came along without, so you never know I don't get like months and months of advance
Right.
notice. So yes, fingers crossed that
Oh, yeah.
this year is a good year, but we'll wait and see.
No, for sure. Well, thank you. Don't hang up yet. Everybody out there, of course, Paul Lewis, thank you for jumping on here. Everybody else, till next time, follow up.
Thanks for listening. Okay.